Welcome, everyone. Oh, Bruno, est-ce que tu as des écouteurs?
Do you have a headset on, Bruno, by any chance?
Okay.
Yes. All right.
I'm just, Danik, hearing a little feedback noise. So if you just want to make sure that everyone else other than Bruno has their sound muted, excellent. Donc, we'll start again. Welcome, everyone. My name is Vicky Brisson. I'm the National Knowledge Mobilization Manager at Lactanet, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. Bienvenue tout le monde. Je m'appelle Vicky Brisson. Je suis la
Welcome,
gestionnaire
everyone.
nationale
My
de
name is Vicky
mobilisation
Brisson. I'm the
des
National
associés
Knowledge
Lactanet et je
Mobilization
serai
Manager at
votre
Lactanet, and
hôte
I'll be
ce
your
webinar.
host for this webinar.
Before we start, please note that this webinar features participants in both official languages. Please follow the instructions on screen to make sure that you're set up to listen exclusively in the language of your preferred choice. That means that to hear the audio in your language of choice, at the bottom of your screen, you should see several webinar controls. Click Interpretation on the right-hand side, and if you can't see it, click More and then Interpretation. Click the language that you'd like to hear. Avant qu'on commence, veuillez noter que ce
So before we
webinaire
start
inclut des
this
participants
webinar,
dans nos deux
we'll
langues
have
officielles.
participants in both official
Merci de
languages.
suivre les
So
instructions
thank you
à
for
l'écran
following
pour vous
these
assurer que vous pouvez
instructions on the
continuer
screen to
à
make sure
écouter
that you can
uniquement
follow
dans la
to
langue que
listen
vous
to
voulez
us
choix.
only in the language of your
C'est-à-dire
choice.
que pour trouver
That
le contenu dans
means
la langue
to
que vous voulez
find
choix,
the audio
plusieurs
in the language
possibilités
of your
différentes
choice.
sont affichées en
You
bas de
know,
l'écran.
as you can see on your
Cliquez sur
screen, click on
Interprétation sur le côté
interpretation
droit qui devrait
on the
avoir
right-hand
normalement un
side,
petit globe terrestre.
which looks
Si
like
vous
a
ne voyez
globe.
pas cette option,
If you don't
cliquez
see
sur
that
Plus
option,
ou
click on
More,
More,
puis sur Interprétation.
and then on
Cliquez
Interpretation,
sur la langue que
click
vous souhaitez.
on the language of your
If you're
choice.
still having trouble setting up simultaneous translation, please send Dadnik, our team member, a message using the chat function so he can assist you. Si vous rencontrez toujours des difficultés pour configurer la
If you
traduction
still have a
simultanée,
problem getting simultaneous
veuillez envoyer
interpretation,
un message à
send
Danick,
a message
notre
to
membre
Danik,
d'équipe, en
our
utilisant
team
la
member,
fonction
by
clavardage
using
qui
the
peut vous
chat
aider.
so he can help assist you.
We also have two screens being shared, one in French and one in English at the top by Bruno Blouin. Please view the instructions on screen to make sure that you're set up to view the correct presentation for the language of your choice. Thanks for joining us today for this Canadian Dairy Hub webinar so that we can learn, act, and improve together for the future of our dairy industry. On a également deux écrans
Also,
partagés,
we have two
un en
screens
français
being
par ma
split,
collègue
one in
Bruno
French
Blouin
by
et
my
un en
colleague
anglais par
Bruno,
moi-même.
and I'm
Veuillez
sharing
voir
the
les
English version.
instructions à
So you can
l'écran
follow
pour vous
these
assurer que vous
instructions
n'aurez
on the
pas
screen to
la
make
même
sure that you look
présentation
at,
dans
you're
la langue
watching
que
the
vous voulez.
right presentation in
Merci
the
d'être
language of
avec
your
nous
choice.
aujourd'hui pour ce
Thank you for
webinaire
being
sur nos
with us
défis
today
canadiens
for
pour qu'on
this
puisse
webinar
apprendre,
so that we can
agir et
learn, act,
améliorer ensemble
and
pour le
improve
futur de notre
together
industrie.
in the best interest of our
I'm now going to
industry.
switch to English. Now that we're set up to listen, I have some other housekeeping items to share with you today. In our webinar, only our panelists and myself will have their cameras and microphones turned on. But we'd still love to hear from you during this webinar. So please use the chat function at the bottom of your Zoom menu to exchange with other participants and ask questions throughout the webinar. Today's webinar is being recorded and we'll share it with you in the coming days. However, we do encourage you to stay for the whole webinar so that you can ask your questions directly to our panelists at the end of our webinar. En français.
And now in
Le
French.
pôle laitier canadien est financé par les producteurs
This is
laitiers du
financed by
Canada
Dairy
et
Producers of
géré par
Canada
Lactanet.
and managed by
Il vise à
Lactanet,
fournir des informations et des
offering
solutions pratiques
information and
et scientifiques à vous,
scientific advice to
producteurs laitiers
you,
canadiens, et à vos conseillers et
producers,
intervenants
and
pour
to
soutenir la
your
mise en œuvre de bonnes
staff
pratiques de gestion
to have
dans le
good
domaine du
practices
bien-être, de
when
la
it
santé
comes
animale,
to
de la
animal health,
reproduction,
wellness,
du secteur
reproduction,
laitier ainsi que de la
dairy herd,
distribution.
and
Si on
sustainability.
était en personne, on
If
se
we were meeting in
présenterait en
person, we
prenant
would
le soin.
introduce ourselves
Mais
by
aujourd'hui,
having
comme je
with
ne
a
peux pas
cup of
voir
coffee.
tous
But
les
today, as I
participants
can't see
individuellement,
all participants
je
of
vous
this
invite à
webinar,
partager avec
I
nous,
invite
Madame
you to share
Clavardage,
with us
votre
in the
nom,
chat your
votre
name,
rôle dans l'industrie
your role
et
within
l'endroit
industry,
d'où vous
and
rejoignez à nous aujourd'hui.
where you're at today.
I'm now going to switch back to English. I invite our panelists to introduce themselves, starting with Dr. Stephen LeBlanc.
Vicky, it's a great pleasure for me to be here. I'm a veterinarian by training. I grew up in Quebec, and I'm now a professor at University of Guelph in the Ontario Veterinary College. And I'm the director of Dairy at Guelph, which is the network of dairy researchers at Guelph. And we can wave our Canadian pride that we are one of the largest, if not, in fact, the largest grouping of dairy researchers across many disciplines in the whole world. Et donc, je suis très content d'être là avec vous
So
aujourd'hui.
I'm very pleased to be with you here today and to join other panelists
M'entretenir avec vous
and
soit en anglais ou en
to
français,
speak with you either in French or in
comme
English
vous voulez.
as you wish.
Thank you so much, Stephen. I'm now going to pass it over to Anton.
Hello, my name is Anton Borst, Halarda Farms, Manitoba, milking 1,300 cows with 20 A5 robots, farming together with my wife, son, his wife, many extended family members, and a lot of employees.
Fantastic. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today, Anton. Et maintenant, en français, je passe la parole à
And
Bruno
now
Blouin.
Bruno
Que vous voulez.
Blouin can introduce himself.
Bonjour, Bruno
So
Blouin,
hello, I'm
Ferme
Bruno
Belhorizon
Blouin,
Inc.
the
Nous sommes
Belhorizon
situés à l'île
farm.
Normande,
We're
au
on
Québec.
the island of Saint
On
Or
a
on the
des
island
fermes
of
robotisées
Orléans
avec
near Quebec. We
75
have robots
vaches.
with 75 cows.
Super, merci beaucoup.
Great. Well, thank you very much,
Puis,
Bruno.
évidemment, je vais
And
envoyer
of
quelques petites
course, I see we
présentations
have
qui
a few
entrent dans notre
presentations
bavardage.
and people are
Mais
introducing
avant de passer
themselves
la
in the
parole
chat.
à
So
Anton et à
before
Bruno
Anton and
davantage, je
Bruno
vous
have
invite
the floor, I
régulièrement
invite
à
you, and I
Danick
would
avec
ask
notre
Danik
sondage.
also
Donc, je
to
vous
open
invite
our
à
survey. So
répondre
I
à une
invite
petite
you to
question au
answer
sondage
a
pour
quick
qu'on
question
puisse
for our survey
savoir,
so that we
entendre ce que
can
vous avez à
know
dire
and
avec
hear what you have to say
ce que vous avez à partager dans le
and
chat
what you wish to
concernant
share
votre plus
when it
grand défi de
comes
gestion
your
des vaches fraîches chez
biggest
vous.
your
Si vous êtes un
biggest
producteur laitier qui joint à nous aujourd'hui,
challenge
il devrait
during
avoir maintenant un
the
sondage à
fresh
votre
period.
écran.
So you should be
Est-ce
able
que
to
c'est
see the
plus
survey on screen.
les maladies
Is it
métaboliques dans la
more
période de transition?
illnesses
Est-ce que
during
c'est
transition
vous la
period?
gestion
Is
des
it
groupes
the
différents
way
de cette
you do
période
group
de
management
densité des veaux?
or
Ou est-ce que c'est
stocking
plutôt la
density,
gestion
or
de
is it rather
l'alimentation pour s'assurer que
feeding
toutes les
management
vaches
to
ont
make
les
sure all the cows
produits,
have the right
leurs besoins remplis?
feed and all
Finalement, est-ce
their
que c'est la
needs are
gestion de
filled,
la
or
dette de
is
votre
it
chat?
body condition
Je vais
score
prendre un petit moment pour
changes? So
laisser
I'll
tout le
give
monde
you
finir.
a few moments to answer that or those questions rather.
Super. Donc, merci beaucoup. Je vais
Great. So thank
partager
you
les
very much.
résultats ici.
I'll
Donc,
share
vous
the
devriez
results
pouvoir
here.
voir vous aussi
So
à
you should
l'écran.
be able
On
to
a
see
beaucoup
this
de
on the
gens
screen. And we have a
justement
lot of
partagent
people
que
who are
la durée
sharing that,
durant la période
yeah,
de transition, c'est un gros
during the
défi
transition
posé par les
problem,
règles
you know,
d'entretien
illnesses and disease
maritime.
during
Donc, je vais
transition is a
partager
big
un petit
problem.
peu
So
les
we'll be
meilleures
talking about this
pratiques.
today. Best
On a aussi
practices will be
Anton,
shared
évidemment,
today. And Anton,
qui
of
est très
course,
progressif sur sa façon de faire
is
gérer
very
les
progressive in the way
évidemment,
he
les
manages
bébés.
disease and,
Puis,
of course,
évidemment, aussi
prevents
Bruno,
them.
qui a fait
And
des petits
Bruno,
changements à sa ferme
made
pour
some changes
réduire
to his farm to
l'incidence des
reduce,
maladies métaboliques.
these
Donc, on
types
a
of
bien hâte
issues.
d'entendre
So we
parler
can't wait to
de ce qu'ils
hear
ont à partager.
what they
Puis,
have to share
c'est
with
super.
us.
Alors, on va
And that's
passer
great.
maintenant, I'm
So
going to go back
let's
to
go
English.
to English.
Anton, we're going to start off with you today. And the first question that I want to ask you is, how do you manage your fresh cows and what metrics do you use to monitor them?
All right, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so like how we manage our fresh cows, the cows are moved 3 weeks prior to calving to a close-up, but then 7 to 10 days before they calve, they're moved to a straw pack, which is obviously less than ideal from a group movement point of view, but we're limited by our facilities. Because we have 150 cows calving every month, we need to do this. So as cows calve, twice a day we move the cows from their straw pack where they calve to the parlor where they get milked, and then they move to a second straw pack where they stay for a number of days. We only move cows to the robots 2 times a week because that is very efficient with our labor and because we have so many cows calving. We also like managing and milking our cows in the parlor because we get our eyes on these animals twice a day during the transition period. Our third lactation plus animals do get a calcium bolus right after calving when they freshen. And we do have the close-up cows on a decad ration. We watch our rumination on the cows very closely with our rumination transponders that we have on them. And because they're very good indication of how transition's actually working. During the transition period, we're also watching obviously for milk fever and retained placenta. The largest change that we have done in our program the last number of years is actually having our dry cows inside, and that's been a very big benefit for transitioning. The calves, when they are born, they are removed from the cows as soon as possible and get pasteurized colostrum.
Thank you so much, Anton, for sharing that and for sharing some pictures ahead of time so that our participants today can get an insight into what your farm actually looks like. So, what's a goal that you're hoping to achieve when it comes to your fresh cow program?
Well, we have lofty goals, but we like to see 0% milk fever, um, close to 0% ketosis, and we know we'll get a few retained placenta cases, especially when we are sometimes dealing with twins. But we're really aiming to have a low as incidence as possible. And really, I mean, that's our focus. That to us is the measure whether our transition program is actually working correctly.
Thank you so much. Ambitious goals for sure. So I'm now gonna move it over to Stephen, and I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so that you can all see him as well. So Stephen, in general, what key metrics should dairy farmers monitor to ensure that their fresh cows are set up for success? And how, it's one thing to actually measure or to know that these are the metrics we should be looking at, but how do we actually measure and track them?
So Anton talked about lofty goals for his herd's performance. As a veterinarian or a consultant, we maybe have lofty goals for the amount of data we have, but there are lots of potential indicators. But I would say we could start with maybe a few key ones that then give us a direction or an indication to maybe go further. So what can be the low-hanging fruit would be really carefully keeping track of clinical diseases. So milk fevers is a really good one because, like Anton said, with really good management, and there's a few ways to get there, but with really good management, that should be a number that's really close to zero. That's attainable when everything's going well. And I think sometimes there might be a misconception occasionally, well, yeah, I know it's bad, but we gave her a bit of calcium, she got up, that's it. It's over, but in fact, that's telling you a lot more about the system. So clinical diseases, of which milk fever, displaced abomasum, again, excellent herds are running, zero would be nice, but are running below 2%, even below 1%. I could go on, but in terms of other ones that are the low-hanging fruit, I would include body condition score. So we're looking for cows to calve at 3 to maximum of 3.5. And then, so those are what I would call lagging indicators. It's after the fact, it's too late for the cow that had the DA. But if we go upstream in the management process, and we'll talk more about this in a few minutes, but it's going to be looking at giving cows the right management resources to thrive. So that's going to be excellent quality feed, always available in the close-up pen, minimal group changes like Anton talked about, and space, lying space. So not more than ideally 4 cows for every 5 headlocks or for every comfortable freestall.
Thank you. So obviously that's our goal to not have transition disease issues, but if a herd is having transition disease issues, where would you suggest they start looking at to identify the possible sources of these problems?
Playing the odds, the best place to start is in the close-up pen. That's, we can get some more insights at looking at which problems are happening and when they're happening. So, for example, things that happen very close to calving almost certainly have their roots in the dry period. Things that are happening in the 2nd or 3rd week after calving may have their roots more after calving. But as a place to start, it's going to be in that close-up dry cow pen. That's kind of the biggest make or break place. And again, The critical things are for cows to eat, drink, lie down, and chew their cud, not unlike a milking cow. And this is the most important place. The fresh cows might be the second most important, but the close-up pen is the most important place for them to have high quality feed in front of them 23, 24 hours a day. And for cows to have adequate space to eat when fresh feed is delivered, which means that, 75 centimeters of linear bunk space per cow, or not more than 4 cows in 5 headlocks, ideally not more than 4 cows for 5 comfortable free stalls.
Thank you so much. So we talked about, looking back if we have an issue, but also talking about that transition period, and we're going to touch later on that on the webinar on reproduction, but because we're talking about transition as well, briefly, what's the impact that our transition disease have outside of the fresh period?
Uh, Money, money welfare, but I break it down, milk culling and repro. And I guess the thing I would underline for today that's maybe the least obvious, but potentially as impactful is on the fertility outcomes. We think about, we don't breed the cow till 2-3 months, or even a little later after the transition period. The idea is that's kind of in the rear view mirror now. But I hope one of the take homes from today is that the cow is still very much on the page that we wrote for her in the transition period, because from a biology standpoint, the egg she's going to ovulate and get pregnant to has been growing for months, and if it grew up in a stressful time or a time of clinical or subclinical disease, that has an impact that lasts for months. And obviously there's going to be less early lactation milk, more uneconomic culling, etc. Those things they're very important, but they're perhaps also a little bit more obvious.
Mhm. Excellent. Thank you so much, Stephen. En français, maintenant, je vais me tourner
And
vers
now in
Bruno.
French, I'll ask Bruno.
Est-ce
So,
que tu pourrais
Bruno,
nous partager
can you
comment est-ce que
share with
chez
us
toi tu gères
how on your
l'élevage
farm,
rouge
how do
et
you
quels sont
manage fresh
les
cows
indicateurs
and what
auxquels
are the
il faut veiller
indicators
pour les
that you
suivre?
use to keep an eye on them?
Tout d'abord,
Well, first of
l'élevage
all,
fraîche, ça commence
fresh
avant le vêlage. On
cows
s'assure
that
que
starts before
l'élevage est
calving to
de
make sure
bonne
the cow
consommation.
has
Si on veut
good
pas une vache
consumption, is eating well. We don't want a
pauvre
cow
qui
that arrives
consomme
and
pas, parce que
that
c'est sûr
doesn't
qu'on va avoir
eat,
des problèmes.
because then we'll have some issues.
On donne avant le vêlage,
And
fait que
before
je m'use
calving,
pour que il n'y ait pas de
to
rétention
make sure
placentaire.
there's
J'ai
no
des conditions
placenta
optimales
retention,
pour avoir
and
un bon départ en
we
lait.
want a
Fait
good
que
start
lorsque la
with
vache est
milk. So
mère, elle est
when the
isolée
cow
dans
is
un
ready,
parc
it's isolated
où ce que, elle est tout seule avec son pot.
alone with
Fait
the calf.
qu'on lui donne de l'eau
So then
tiède,
we
de
give
la
him,
RTM, du foin sec pour qu'il boive le
RPM
plus
and
possible
some
dès le
water
début de la lactation.
to start eating at the beginning of
Puis,
lactation. And
c'est ça, fait que les
that's
vaches
right.
reçoivent
So
des bonus
cows
de
receive
calcium pour les troisième
calcium
trimestre.
food,
Puis, on les
and
laisse avec les veaux
we let them
jusqu'à
with the
12 heures des
calves
fois.
up to 12 hours at a time
Fait que,
sometimes,
on laisse
so
la
that
vache s'occuper de son
the
veau, on laisse le veau
cow
tourner.
can take care of the calf
La
and
vache
the
va se
calf
comporter
can
dans le
eat, and
bêtement avant de
the
l'emmener
cow is comfortable where
au
the cow
robot
is in the park before
dans
going
le
to
parc
the
hôpital.
robot.
Fait que quand il est dans le parc
So
hôpital,
when
il est là
they're in
2-3
the
jours.
hospital
Le
enclosure, it's there
principal
2-3 days, and
indice, c'est
the
la
main
rumination.
indicator
On
is
s'assure que la vache a
rumination. We
une
make
bonne
sure the cow has
rumination
good
avant de
rumination
l'envoyer dans le
before
troupeau.
sending the cow
Puis,
back to the
s'il y
herd.
a un problème, s'il y
And
a
if there's
quelque
a
chose, on
problem, if
ramène la
there's
vache dans
something, we
l'hôpital.
bring
Là,
back the
dans
cow
l'hôpital, il n'y a pas
in
de
our
compétition.
little infirmary, if you
La
will, in
vache
our
est
little
là
hospital. There's less competition
accès à du
there,
foin sec. Fait
and
que
the cow has access to
c'est plus
dry
facile pour la
feed, so
transition.
it's easier during that
Super. Ben, merci
transition.
beaucoup,
That's great. Well,
Bruno,
thank you
pour les
very much. Thank you.
interventions.
We're talking about rumination.
Là, tu utilises tes
You
moniteurs de
use
proximité aussi là, avec tes
monitors,
colis,
right?
pour les colis que tes vaches ont déjà pour
Oui.
Right.
monitorer la constitution.
They already have those
Puis,
necklaces to
différents
monitor the
problèmes,
cows. Yeah, right. And when we talk
plusieurs
about,
changements là, à travers
you've
les
made many
années.
changes
Donc,
through the
différents
years.
problèmes que vous
So
avez
what's an issue
constatés
that
durant la
you've
période de
seen
vélage, la période
during
de
the
transition, que
calving and
c'est quoi les petits
transition
changements
period?
que vous avez
And what are the
apportés
changes that
et
you
mis en
brought
place
about
pour
or
les
put in
remédier?
place to remedy those
Avant,
issues?
les vaches venaient dans
Well,
des stalles
before
attachées.
this was
Puis,
in, they were
avec la
tied,
construction de la nouvelle étable,
when
on
we
vient
built our
l'éleveur
new
en
farm.
vide.
So now they're in
Fait que c'est
freestall,
beaucoup plus
as you
facile
can
pour
see on
la
the screen.
vache.
So it's a lot
Beaucoup moins
easier for the cow
d'intervention pour
to do calving. There are fewer interventions for us. Before, we could intervene maybe 80% of the time we had to intervene during calving. Now, it's about 20% of calving, they need some assistance. So it's a lot easier. Our transition indicators have increased and improved a lot. I think the cow is healthier. And something else also that we've done is we've changed the way we prepare for calving. Before, we didn't have good results with what was prepared by companies in terms of feeds. So instead of giving already prepared, we added some feeds. So she gets food throughout the dry period, and when it's ready, we have enough soya.
7 à 8 kilos de RTN.
And to add that, we add 7 to 8 kilos of RTN. And at that point, that's how we've improved the transition indexes and jump-started our cows. Thank you for sharing that with us, Bruno. It's important to understand that cows are comfortable and that they have as much protein as they need to get started in lactation. I'm going to stop sharing my screen in just a minute, and I'm going to move to Stephen so that we can hear from him about what you've just shared. Stephen, can you share other practices that could be applicable to reduce any interventions during calving? Yeah, I'll start by saying that what Bruno and Anton said is important. Investing in infrastructure, in pens for calving, that's going to be really profitable for producers. So as a whole, producers are really satisfied with the investments that they've already done for calving. And, we can't do too much, basically, to invest. In other words, we want to give more comfort and space to each cow for feeding, for sleeping, for rumination, etc. So to move to things a little bit more specifically, improvements, you want very specific ones, and you want to improve protein and minerals. Stephen, you've just put yourself on mute. Oh, sorry. My bad. I'm back. I clicked by accident, my bad. But it's just to say that when it comes to specific things, so in Rumensin, I don't have any shares in the company, but that is a company that has done a whole lot of good research on prevention, and so it's been helpful for cows as well. The other thing is vaccination against Mammitis E. coli caused. Those that's pretty common. Some cases can be severe. Some can be very, very severe, even though not that many of them are severe, but they can be. So these are products for producers. It's a really good investment into the cows as well during calving and during preparation for calving. In other words, you want to prevent and not have to heal in the meantime. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. Yeah, we talked about the practices that Anton and Bruno are already applying, and both of them also mentioned how important it was to use rumination as a key indicator to determine when fresh cows are ready to join the herd again. Can you just share that with us here today? Why is it important to maintain rumination for cow management and health? Yeah, well, more and more producers have those activity sensors that include rumination. Research is still ongoing. Now, we know that it could be a tool, and it is a tool that is validated sufficiently so far. It more or less corresponds with the beginning of lactation and dry matter consumption. So there is a correlation there. So we're looking for cows whose rumination is going up from one day to the next, However, there isn't really a specific threshold yet that we can apply to all farms and say, okay, it'll be 450 or 50 minutes per cow, or, that's the key threshold that can be applied everywhere. We don't have that, but there is something a little bit more approximative. And we know that when the cow increases in rumination, and at the time when either the cow has hit a plateau and is no longer increasing rumination, or it starts to go back down again, well, that could be a warning that would show up maybe a day or a couple days before the milk production goes down, a day before, a couple of days before. And then she'll start to really not look good. The cow will start to not be well. And so that is an indicator. So it doesn't say that there is a disease, mammitis or something like that. You do have to look at the diagnosis and then care for said cow. But it is a tool for sure that is more and more useful uh, in the toolbox for producers. So it's a great example of technology to help us manage our herds, right? Is that correct for the future? Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to move to English.
And go back to English just for the next little segment. So, first of all, Stephen, thank you for sharing all of these insights and expertise on fresh cow health and management. That really gives us a quick summary into the transition period. We're now going to move into the reproduction aspect of our discussion. But before we do that, our dear audience, we want to invite you to answer another poll question. So I'm going to look to Danik, our AV support. There you go. So our question for you is, what is your biggest challenge for reproductive management? We've tried to narrow it down into 4 key sections. If there's others that are not identified in there that you may also want to share with Stephen, feel free to put that in the chat. But the 4 key challenges, that we want to know if you're really dealing with is heat detection, sire selection, and I'm just gonna reopen. It looks like share, stop sharing. Danik, can you confirm if the poll is still open? Okay. So we had a few questions
relaunched it.
here. Okay, excellent. So yeah, heat detection, sire selection, pregnancy rate, or pregnancy losses. I know that we were getting a few different answers. So if you already answered, I just ask you to answer again just so that we can have the best picture. And so it looks like a majority of our audience really struggles or has issues around pregnancy rate. And so I'm sure that Steve will be able to talk about that in his later section. But we still have a few that are answering, heat detection, sire selection, and pregnancy losses. So I look forward just ending the poll and sharing the results with you so that you can also see what I'm seeing on my side. But of course, having Stephen share some of his expertise, but also having Anton and Bruno share what they've done, what they've tried, because I know sometimes it's not always an easy challenge to tackle. So with that, sorry, I got ahead of myself. What I meant to do is stop sharing my screen. We're now going to go over to Anton again. So Anton, speaking of reproductive programs, we know you have a big herd, so you may be doing things slightly different. So what are you doing with your reproduction program to ensure your herd's reproductive success?
All right, thank you. Well, we have become very structured around reproduction. So we have the daily activity monitors are part of our software. And we are breeding on that for the first cycle. If cows don't chew heat after one cycle, then we will switch them to an off-sync program just to get cows bred. And that is based off a voluntary waiting period of 60 days for cows and 70 days for our first calf heifers. We set the voluntary waiting period at those days based on the advice of our advisors, our veterinarian and our repro people. Like we review that once in a while where that needs to be. to get a combination of good results, not losing production, and also getting cows pregnant efficiently. We use DairyComp for monitoring all our repro results and all our herd health. So all our animals are genomically tested, so that's part of our repro. And based on those results of the genomic test, we decide what animals will get bred with beef semen and which ones will get Holstein semen. We use sex semen a lot. We use it 2 services on older cows, 3 services on virgin heifers, and then after that we will switch to conventional Holstein. So currently we're using about 75% Holstein, 25% beef semen. We do breed all cows to all the Holstein bulls we use are A2A2 rated, and that is just because we think that's going to become a bigger thing in the future. We do select the bulls that we use for breeding, or the Holstein bulls, on our own index, which we put together with our genetic advisor from WestGen, and it's based 52% on production, 30% on health traits, and 18% on conformation. That 60% or the 52% of production traits is 60% based on protein and 40% on fat, which was also a recent change because we do think there's going to be more focus on protein again in the future. The health traits component, which was 30%, of that 30%, 60% is on herd life, 20% is on daughter fertility, and 20% on somatic cell score. And then the smaller part of 18% that we have on conformation is 75% on udder and 25% on feet and legs. Other things that we consider when we select bulls is immunity plus is very important to us. Milking speed, because we do work with robots and we're trying to maximize output, calving ease, and we'll also look at pro dollars. But there's a close alignment between high pro dollars and our own index. So, but it reinforces that we're using the right bull when they're also high pro dollars.
So from the sounds of it, you've thought out very well your reproductive program. What are challenges that you may be still facing in your reproductive program? And if there are, if you're willing to share them with us, what are you doing to address these challenges? Of course, beyond your very thorough reproductive program.
Yeah, there's always always challenges as long as you have animals, I think. But the lower conception rate on sex semen that we get compared to conventional semen is still a challenge, because in a perfect world we would produce only Holstein heifers and beef calves, because the Holstein steers or Holstein bulls at a lower value. So we are experimenting at different times, and we compare to see where the drop-offs are, the changes are with the different repro programs. So like, do we get a drop-off between first and second service on sex semen or whatever? But because we have DairyComp, we can monitor that very close. And we'll try different protocols then, and we'll try it one way for a month, and then we'll try it the other way for a month, and just to get our own in-house results, how this is working on our farm. Because we have a lot of data, we can do that and we get pretty good results. So currently, like, our current experiment is we are now starting to use sex semen on our off-sync cows, which we haven't done in the past. And that's also in an effort then to be able to eventually use more beef semen too, because we will be generating less Holstein bull calves.
Thank you so much, Anton. Yeah, having so many cows allows you to see the results of your changes a lot faster than perhaps smaller herds may be able to. So thank you for sharing your lessons so that everyone on the call today can learn from them. Stephen, going back to you, and speaking of conception rate, what are some factors that can affect conception rate and that we should be kind of keeping on our dashboard and monitor?
So the list of things that can affect the cow's conception rate is as long as my arm, but There's a few key ones, and I'll actually maybe start on the opposite side very quickly, and that's as we have more and more producers or their employees doing their own breeding, the semen handling and insemination technique is something that needs to be checked on. Cleanliness of the equipment, verifying the thaw bath temperature, making sure that semen is inside the cow within 15 minutes of the straw coming out of the tank, making sure that we have consistent semen placement, those kinds of things. If we come back to the cow side of things, again, if I could put it in a really big bucket, I say this half jokingly, but if we prepare the cow well, meaning if she has a good start, a healthy start without subclinical or clinical disease problems as a fresh cow, it's almost hard to hold her back. But if she starts with one or more transition period health problems, it's very hard to get her back. So for example, nice big study from Germany, even on cows that were all put on double OVSync, which by one perspective is sort of the Cadillac on average promises the highest pregnancy per AI at first service. Cows that were on that program, if they had even one transition period health problem, that was knocking 10 to 15 percentage points off of their success at first service. And again, in different contexts, the number is not going to be smaller than that. So that's kind of it's not zero, but that's what's on the table, and it underlines the importance and the long-lasting effect of investing to avoid both clinical and subclinical health problems because they have such a long hangover.
Thank you, Stephen. And so let's say our cows don't have issues at reproduction and they're high producers. How can we achieve that high peak milk yield without sacrificing reproductive success? Because we know that they're often or almost competing for the cow's energy. So if you can talk to that a little.
Yeah, it's true that physiologically at a certain point there is a competition for physiologic resources between milk and repro. Fun fact, dairy cows uh, are some of the only mammals that lactate and gestate at the same time, the way we ask cows to do. But the answer is both easy and difficult. And what I mean by that is, if you say to me, I'm all about milk, I want peak milk, I'm super focused on milk, what should I do? Have comfort for your cows, excellent feed, excellent cooling in the summer, good management, generally kind of all the best practice checklist. And you say, well, okay, I'm all about fertility. What do I do if I really want to focus on fertility? It's the same list. That's the good news. So it's the principle is easy. Execution and consistent delivery is not easy. But the good news is it's the same list, because by supporting cow comfort, excellent feed in front of them all the time, feed access, cooling, water, et cetera, the list that we know very well, it's the same list. And so that's the virtue, and it's why herds that have really excellent success don't have to choose between a high preg rate and high production of milk per cow. We can have both. We should have both. It's not easy, but it's very possible.
Thank you so much, Stephen. I see a few questions coming in the chat. So just as a reminder, we'll be taking those at the end of the webinar. So keep them coming. And I've been asking a lot of questions to Anton, Bruno, Stephen. But Anton, do you have a question that you'd like to ask Stephen before we move on to Bruno?
Yeah, I have a question. Like, we're experiencing increased training rates on some of our older cows. Like, what factors would affect that?
So the short answer is that obviously a cow should normally ovulate one egg at a time and therefore have one calf at a time. When cows have twins, it's because they had, within a follicular wave, they had two follicles, two eggs that grew up and got ovulated. So unlike in humans, where sometimes it's got a pregnancy and that embryo split in two and you have identical twins, that almost never happens in cows. It's because they ovulated two. And the single biggest reason why a cow does that is because her blood progesterone level at the time that follicle was growing, so in the 10 days before you bred her, was relatively low. And the biggest reason why her progesterone would be low is because her metabolic rate is higher. So very high producing cows, there's nothing wrong with their ovaries. Their ovaries still make, their CL still makes as much progesterone. However, every time a cow pumps a liter of blood through her liver to digest her feed to make milk, the side effect is she's also clearing a little bit of the progesterone out of her bloodstream, and the net effect of that is to lower her blood progesterone a little bit, which allows her then to have two dominant follicles instead of one. So that's where the twins come from. It's not, in the past people have speculated, is it because of synchronization programs? Is it because of some other thing like that? No, not really. So the good news is we understand where it's coming from. The bad news is that's somewhat difficult to shift. And so again, our best answer is feed the cows as well as possible, and that's going to keep twinning rates to that low single digits as opposed to high single digits.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for answering that question from Anton. Je vais maintenant passer au français, puis retourner vers
I'll
Bruno.
move back to
Donc,
French.
Bruno, c'est à ton
And
tour.
so, Bruno, it is over to you. Can you talk to us about your reproduction program and for you, the indicators that you use? Yeah, first of all, for me on my farm, there's no intervention before 50 days in milk. So I'm looking for natural heat. If a cow at 50 days in milk doesn't have her heat, we go see the vet. And after that, well, after talking to the vet, we decide if we do a 7-to-1 or something else. What we're looking for is around 75 days. That should be ready around 75 days. And then when we have the Lely activity system, we use that as well. And so we use the Lely activity system to our advantage, and we are often in the barn, and so we do a lot of observing. We observe the cows a lot, and that's how I can tell whether they are in heat or not. Okay, yeah. So we did a little call beforehand, and you said, yeah, it's my observations that go really, really far, so that you can notice what's going on with your cows, right? That's something. So you've got a really good eye. So that's really great in the barn. That's so helpful. And then if we talk about your conception rate and your calving intervals, sorry, how do you function? Well, the calving intervals are such that I think that's a good indicator of profitability. We ensure that the cow will, within 400 days, calve again. If I target under 400 days, so if I have a first cow around 75, a second one around 100, and if the third one's at 120, it doesn't go well, then the cow won't be calving within 400 days. So anyway, we do take a look at that very, very closely. And our conception rate is at 2.19 right now, 2.19. So we're not afraid of using different tools if we need to get the heat going or do some therapy. Then if the cow's open at 150 days, then we've got, three or four, if it's 3 or 4 inseminations, then we have to see how the cow will respond. And then within 400 days, if calving happens, it's really great. Okay, thank you for sharing that. Can you share with us what type of a challenge would you have faced in that type of reproduction structure that you have, and what did you do? Well, reproduction's a daily challenge. Let's put it that way. Every week, there are new cows that we have to inseminate. I think that the biggest challenges are the heat stress And for us at the same time on the farm, we've got foods that aren't fermented at the same time. So it's like a combination that leads to greater challenges. So over that period, what we do is that we are more aggressive around protocols and whatnot. We ensure that we've got a good level of energy being generated. Vitamins, managing the vitamins is something I like a lot. We take a good look at the vitamins to make sure that the cows are responding to the protocols in place. And basically, those are the biggest issues that we may experience here on the farm. Thank you, Bruno. Now, I have a question for Stephen about all of this because all cows at some point will have an impact or face heat stress or nutritional stress. What's the impact of that stress on success or failure of a reproduction attempt or insemination attempt? Right. So for heat stress, I would say that in Canada, we continue to underestimate the impacts of heat stress because in Canada, generally it's cold and, it could be hot in July, but it doesn't last long. So I think we underestimate heat stress in Canada pretty considerably. Because we know, amongst other things, that it it has an impact on a number of elements of insemination. So, for example, when we have heat stress, and I would like to mention that here we're talking about a temperature and moisture index that exceeds a score of 68. Basically, that means as of 25 degrees Celsius, depending on humidity, but in most of Canada, we're talking at approximately, uh, well, you don't have to be at 35 degrees Celsius for heat stress for a lactating cow. And so the heat stress at 25 degrees has an impact on heat detection expression, but also in the quality of the embryo, the durability of the embryo. But also, it could have long-term effects on the quality of ovocytes. And so it's not, just a question of saying, oh, it was hot. It was hot today, tomorrow morning it's going to be cooler. And so we're fine, we've gotten through it. No, that's not entirely true in terms of embryo loss, in terms of the decrease in the expression of a heat, the a decrease in ovocyte quality. Impacts could last up to 2 months. That's why it's the case that sometimes we're disappointed in our gestation rates in the summertime because things pop back up again in the fall. But essentially, we can't prevent heat in the summertime, of course, but we have means which, in my humble opinion, are underused in terms of like a ventilation in the barn, watering, down of the cows. These are investments that could be very fruitful at the end of the day, both for milk production, but also gestation rates. Thank you, Stephen. Bruno, I think maybe you had another question for Stephen before we move on to the next section of the day. Did you not? Yes, I did. I was wondering, what's the impact of vitamin D on reproduction? And is there something else that we can do to make sure that we have higher gestation rates? Okay, well, whether it's vitamin D or other things, there are a bunch of elements, nutritional elements, that are essential really for reproduction, for the quality of the embryo, for all sorts of things. So if you're asking me, is it important? Yes, absolutely. However, if you ask me, okay, well, give me proof that a supplement, vitamin A, vitamin D, or anything else, how much is that worth in terms of insemination success? Well, it's hard to tell. Like if there was a real lack somewhere, then yes, of course, there would be important impact. However, as of the moment, when we've got good nutrition, and that a professional nutritionist puts the food together for the cows. Well, lacks as such, it's not really a deficiency, but having deficiencies will be rare, right? So it's very important. Yes, it's important to have good feeding. Normally, what we put into the base ration should, in most cases, meet dairy cow needs, even high producing cows. Okay, does that answer your question, Bruno? Yes, it does. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you, Stephen. I'm going to switch back to English.
Last round of questions to our panelists before we move on to our audience Q&A. So for our participants today, I do remind you to put your questions in the chat so we can address them in the last 15 minutes of our webinar and time together. So Anton, the question I have for you is, in your opinion, what is the importance of proper data recording on your farm, and how does it impact your protocols and your success?
Okay, thank you. Well, we think that proper records and proper data are super important, critical importance even. If you don't have data, you don't count on it for management decisions. If you have bad data, you make wrong decisions with confidence. And when you have good data, you can make good decisions with confidence. So accuracy is very important. We will try different things on the farm, and we depend on being able to have data from before and after we make the change to be able to measure. And we don't actually change protocols unless it's indicated by something that we see in data. And we also want to be able to measure the results. So sometimes we will delay implementing a potential change to make sure that we have good data from before or good benchmarking before we implement a change.
Thank you, Anton. Je vais aussi tourner la question vers Bruno. Donc, évidemment, Bruno,
I'm going to turn the question over to Bruno as well. So, Bruno, on your farm, you mentioned observations as well, but what's the importance of data as you do your work, and how do you manage your farm in consequence? Well, first of all, the more data we have, the better decisions we'll be able to make. So we look at all of the data that we can, right? Activity, rumination, we make a lot of observations. People on the farm are constantly watching out, and the vet, when the vet comes, then I want the vet to tell me if my cows are too small, etc. So I want to have as much data as possible to make the best decisions as possible. And so data is absolutely essential. We need good data to make good decisions. Thank you, Bruno. Stephen, do you have any items to add to that from your experience? I mean, we've got two producers. They're both very different, but they have practices that are very similar. And so it's a question of best practices. What, anything you want to add? And maybe you can add some things, Stephen. Yeah, just a couple of things. First of all, hats off to our two producers here. And I just wanted to say in closing that, yes, it's essential. And Anton and Bruno explained it well, but what's essential is to recognize and to very focus. Like when you inseminate cows at approximately 120 days, if that is truly our target, and no cow exceeds 75 to 80 days in lactation without insemination some way or another, either by heat or synchronization by protocol. We need a game plan, and we need to stick to the game plan to ensure that the cows are inseminated at least once, and they have two opportunities, if not three, like Bruno mentioned, to reach their top and be pregnant at 120 days in lactation. As for keeping files in order, that's really important, as Anton said. Without that, we are, moving forward blindly, and we might have confidence in false data and make poor decisions then. Just another thing, Anton mentioned that on his farm he's done some clinical tests and done their own sort of research to compare two different approaches in a protocol. That's an excellent idea. But the caveat is just a word of wisdom. That happens more or less when we are at 1,200 cows in lactation. When you've only have 100, be careful because there are all types of variabilities. You can't change one thing from another at some point because otherwise it's never ending and we'll change things around too quickly and have too many
Merci beaucoup,
errors.
Stephen.
Okay, thank you, Stephen.
Anton, Bruno, we're going to let you think as well on if you have questions to ask each other. I know this is something we had not prepared for you for, so we won't put you on the spot right away. Je vais retourner au français. Steven, on a une question qui vient un petit peu en suivi à ma question
Stephen,
sur
it's
la
a similar
gestion des
question that I
maladies.
imagine when we talked about
C'est une question qui
managing
est un
disease, a
peu
question which
demandée
was
et qui a
posed,
beaucoup d'intérêt de nos participants
and
à
our participants were
l'institution.
really interested in that
Quel
question.
indicateur est-ce qui
So,
devrait
what
être
indicators
utilisé pour
should
évaluer
we
la
use
santé
to assess
reproductive de
reproductive
l'entrepôt?
health
C'est quoi
of a
les
herd?
outils qui
So,
sont
what are the
disponibles pour
tools that are
s'aider à
available
prendre ces
to
mesures?
help
Notamment, on a
producers
entendu
make
juste
the
avant
right
Bruno,
decisions? Of course,
qui
we
est un
heard
excellent
Bruno,
observateur,
who's a
qui
good
lui
observer.
relate
He
la
can
partie
really
bénéfique.
watch and
Mais si on doit justement remettre
he
la
can do
gestion
it. But
de la
if
reproduction à des employés ou qui n'ont peut-être pas le
employees
même
are in
œil,
charge of
c'est quoi des
reproduction,
outils
they
que
may
tu
not have
conseillerais à nos producteurs?
Bruno's experience. So, how can we help our producers?
Si on commence vraiment
It really
au niveau
starts
de la
with
nativité, on y va en reculant.
with
Du moment
the
qu'on a
top,
la gestation
as soon as we have 21-day gestation period above 25%,
vas-y tranquillement parce que ça va
let's go
entraîner
slowly
la
because it's
migration
fine,
ou quoi que ce
be
soit.
careful
Si
before you
on
change
recule
anything.
un peu vers
If we
le
go
succès
back
à la première saillie,
towards
encore là,
success
du
at the
moment
very
qu'on est
start, as soon as
surtout à
we're
45% de
at
plus, ça va
45% or
bien.
more,
Donc,
things are going
ne
well.
rien changer
So don't
sans
change
vraiment
anything
faire l'évaluation. Par contre,
without
du moment
further
que
assessment.
le
But
succès est à
when
la première saillie,
success
par exemple,
at the
est à
first trial
40 ou
is
en
at
bas,
40
et
or
là, c'est la
lower,
question de
then
c'est le moment de se poser
it's
des
the time to
questions.
ask oneself some questions
Pourquoi? C'est
to
sûr que
say
l'histoire
why.
de
Of
procédé
course,
est longue.
there's a long list of
On va parler
possibilities,
de
but again,
recul
we go
vers
back in time
préparation de l'élevage.
towards
Mais pour répondre à
calving
la
and
question
calving
dont
preparation,
on n'a
but
pas
to
parlé encore,
answer something that we have yet to
qui va être
mention
vraiment
and really
un indicateur clé
can be a key
si l'état
indicator,
de santé
it would
utérienne
be
du tractus reproducteur pourrait être
the
estimé
reproduction health
vers un
of
mois,
the
5
cow a
semaines
month,
après
5 weeks
l'élevage. Donc,
after
c'est une
calving.
question de faire
What
un
is
petit
the
diagnostic
cow
pour
health?
des
So we
vaches
should do
qui
some
ont
diagnosis
un
for cows
développement
that'll
purulent.
have some
Ça, c'est un
slower
problème
dripping.
dont
It's a problem
15 à 20
in
des
about
vaches
15
laitières
to 20%
sont
of
atteintes.
dairy cows.
Ça ramasse un peu
It
son
brings together, if you will,
en termes de
what the cow experience in terms of
lait
placenta
autres problèmes
retention and other issues
en début de
linked
lactation.
to reproduction at the
Vont
beginning of lactation.
avoir guéri,
Some
soit
will
par
heal
soit par
through
elle-même, mais de
treatment
toute
or by
façon,
themselves. But
rendu
anyways,
là,
once you're
à
there,
5 semaines en
4 or 5 weeks in
c'est un
lactation,
moment clé de
this is a key moment
vérifier,
to
valider,
check
faire un
and
diagnostic.
validate and do a
C'est quand
diagnosis.
même assez
And it's fairly well.
voire très simple
It's quite
de
simple,
voir
really,
si la
is
vache
to
a
see
un
if the cow
développement purulent
has
ou non.
any
Ça se fait avec
dripping, and you can do so with
un
a
assiette
metri
industrielle
check.
avec
So you do it
un hémisphère en caoutchouc
with
pour
a
rentrer
rubber,
un peu, sortir un
you
échantillon
you get a
de mucus qui
sample
est là
of the
et voir
mucus
si
that's there to
ça
see
ressemble à du
if
pus.
it
Si
looks
oui,
at
ça se
pus.
fait
If yes, then that
avec
can be
un
treated
antibiotique
with
ARV pour
antibiotics
cette fin, sans période de retrait.
for that
Un seul traitement
specific issue, one
pour
treatment. It's a
guérir
single
ces
treatment
infections
to
qui
heal
peuvent
these
être
types
sur
of infections
l'utérus ou
that can
encore
be at the
sur l'ovaire.
urus level
Mais de toute
or
façon, c'est
beyond.
quelque
And
chose qui
the
nuit
idea is that's something that could
significativement
really
à la
hamper
fertilité de la vache, puis
the
c'est un
cow's
problème
fertility.
dont
And
la
it's a
prévalence
problem
est entre 15 et
that's
20% des
that's
vaches. Donc
common in
ça,
about 70, 20,
ça peut
15 to
être
20% of cows. So
un excellent
that
point
could
de
be an
départ
excellent
qui encore
starting point.
est
Again,
sous-utilisé
this is underused, perhaps, and underappreciated
dans l'industrie canadienne.
in the dairy industry in
Merci
Canada.
beaucoup,
Well, thank you very
Stephen.
much,
On a une
Stephen.
autre question
So we have another question again on reproduction, and then we have another question coming from our participants. So during the calving period.
Shift to English for this question. So the question is, how can we prevent follicular cysts in high-producing fresh cows?
To a point, it's a occupational hazard of a high producing cow. The reason why a cow would have a cyst is actually very similar to the reason why a cow might have twins. So at the base, it's that the cow had a follicle that was growing normally, but it failed to get ovulated. So in other words, there's nothing wrong actually with the follicle or the egg inside it, but it didn't get a signal from the cow's brain, an LH surge, to cause it to ovulate. So it just keeps growing. And the egg inside that follicle quickly becomes infertile. In the old days, we used to think that that cow was just stuck, like she was going to be stuck with this cyst and like in suspended animation for weeks and months if we didn't do something. That's not true, but it's still not a desirable thing. So I would say if the cyst is happening before the breeding period, especially 30, 40 days in milk, frankly, don't worry about it. If it is in the breeding period, the treatment of choice is to put the cow on a OVSync-like protocol with a progesterone device, so a CEDAR or a PRID. Because again, the fundamental pathology is that the cow previously was lacking in progesterone. That's why she didn't have her LH surge. And so that's what we can do about it therapeutically. The question I know was for prevention. Again, there's not a particular treatment out of a bottle or a device that's going to prevent that. But again, partially, if it's very early, don't worry. And for the others, again, just the general good management, good nutrition is going to keep that at a level where that really, yes, it's annoying and bothersome for the individual cow, but it really shouldn't be a herd level problem.
Thank you, Stephen. We're making your brain go back and forth. On a maintenant une question, on va aller en
And
français.
now we'll
On a
move to
maintenant une
French.
question de Dorothée qui
We have a
demande,
question for
est-ce que
Dorothy
c'est
asking,
recommandé de
is
donner
it
un
recommended
antidouleur
to
aux
give an
veillages pour aider
anti-pain for calving,
améliorer la capacité de
to
récupération
improve
du village,
the
pour
recoup,
favoriser
the
la consommation
recuperation,
alimentaire, puis pour
to help
éviter
with
ou
feed
diminuer les troubles
and
de la veille?
reduce metabolic issues?
Est-ce que c'est une bonne idée? Oui, en
Is it a
principe,
good
c'est une
idea? Yes, in
excellente
principle,
idée,
it's an
sauf
excellent idea to
pour
give
ce qui est de
painkillers,
la preuve
except
scientifique,
in
il y a
terms of
plusieurs études
scientific
qui ont été
evidence
effectuées
and research that were
à
done by my
Genève,
colleagues at the University
qui
of
ont
Guelph,
donné
which they
différents
gave different
anti-inflammatoires non stéroïdiens
anti-inflammatory
peu après le
meds.
breeding, qu'il ne faut pas le faire
We
utile
can't do
pendant
it
le vélage. Il faut
during
laisser
calving. We have
finir le
to
vélage.
make sure
Sinon,
calving is
ça
over.
va
Otherwise,
ralentir le
it will
vélage
slow
et
down
risque
calving, and there are some risks
mortalité et autres choses. Donc,
of
il faut laisser finir
mortality.
le
So
vélage
we
et
let
par la suite. Donc, c'est une
calving
excellente
finish,
idée.
and
Sauf que
afterwards, it's an excellent idea.
au niveau de
However,
la preuve scientifique,
when it
justement,
comes to
on laisse
scientific
du
evidence in
comportement,
terms of the
l'histoire du
behavior
bien-être
and
du
the
vélage,
wellness of the cow,
c'est franchement pas très
frankly,
convaincant
it's
que
not
les
really
soucis
convincing
ou la façon
that
que
the
nous avons
way that
utilisé
we've used the
comprend
tools that we have at our disposal in terms of painkillers, it doesn't seem to make
en termes
a big difference
d'appauvrissement de
either
lait
to have more milk
autre
and
chose. Puis même
afterwards.
si on met ça de
And
côté,
even if we set this
si on
aside
veut vraiment
and we
le
really
bien-être du
target
village
animal
sans
wellness
forcément avoir
without
plus de lait ou autre
necessarily
chose,
having more milk,
jusque-là,
up
la
to
preuve n'est
now,
pas
the
démontrée
evidence
que
is
c'est
just
suffisant,
not
qu'on n'a pas
present,
trouvé
or
les
we
moyens
have yet to find the means
d'améliorer le sort
to
de nos vaches.
ascertain this and
Du moment où
improve.
on parle d'une vache qui a vraiment connu une
When we were talking
dysstocie,
about
là,
a
ça
cow
va
that
être
suffered
moins
greatly,
étudié
well,
parce que
then this was less studied because
heureusement plus de choses
this
rare.
is a rare event,
Là,
dystocia.
je serais
Uh,
plus porté à dire,
There, I would say
continuons
yes. Well, let's
avec
go
les
with
principes de base.
with the basic principles.
Faut comprendre
But we can
qu'il y a
understand that,
certaines
of
douleurs,
course,
même
there's some
avec le
pain,
beau vélage qu'on
even
peut
with the
espérer.
best calving that we can hope for.
Il n'est pas de
But we
dire
still
que
don't have evidence
c'est
saying
un traitement
this is a treatment
à conseiller
that is to be considered or
pour tous les
advised,
élevages.
not for
Merci
all
beaucoup,
cows.
Stephen.
Well, thank you
We're
very
now
much,
going to switch
Stevens.
back to English because we have a question question for Anton from Mary Lou. And her question is regarding your reproductive program and your selection decisions. So, what is your opinion on the drive to breed for smaller structure or more efficient cows? If you're willing to comment on that.
Sure. I mean, I'm willing to comment. It seems like a dangerous question to get asked in some ways. I mean, I was raised as a 4-H kid, and I love to show, and I love the big cows. So I've gotten over that. The reality is that I think it benefits all dairy producers to breed for a more efficient cow as opposed to a larger one. There's no indications, scientific indications or scientific reasons to have a larger cow. All our data that I'm aware of, it all shows that the medium, smaller size cow is more efficient, lasts longer, and just produces just as much, if not more, than a larger cow. So yeah, your heart and your head might go in two different directions when it comes to this question.
Thank you so much, Anton. Bruno, je vais maintenant me tourner vers
And
toi.
Bruno, I'll turn to you.
Une question
So, a question for you, seeing as you moved to a robot, recently you moved to a robot milking system, the way you observe the cows or the way you watch, when they suffer from heat, did you make any changes during the transition? And do you have other comments to add or advice to share with our producers listening to us today? Well, it really didn't change anything. I always like watching myself, my herd. I like walking in the barn, look at the cows and see the heat by myself. Of course, before I didn't have a system monitoring all this. So that's an additional tool. It helps me sometimes to find it when we'll do this and that. So yeah. And the other question was what? Whether you had additional comments or advice on the way you manage the transition or reproduction period that we have yet to share, but that you would like to share with our producers, or maybe we did everything has been said. I'd say cows, having known both, cows that calve in an open space, they're more likely they'll have better outcomes. The cow it's more natural come environment. There's less spatial constraints. So that would be my comment. Well, thank you very much.
So we now have another question, which I believe is for Stephen from Furkan Chachur. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing your name correctly. So, does uterine infection or do they have an effect on subsequent pregnancy losses? And if so, how? Just briefly, what's the mechanism? Previously, it seemed they thought that cows who became pregnant after clearing, it was thought that cows become pregnant just once they're really clear and they have a proper uterine environment.
So the short answer is yes, absolutely. There's an effect, and it's a double whammy. So a cow that lived through uterine disease could be retained placenta, metritis, purulent vaginal discharge, like I talked about a few minutes ago, or endometritis, or any or all of the above. Metritis is the one we have the most data. The answer is the 1-2 punch is they're less likely to get pregnant at first service or other services. And even if and when they do get pregnant, their pregnancy losses subsequently are as much as double. So for example, from one of our recent studies, to give the specific example of metritis, pregnancy losses from day 19, where we can use a special research blood test to tell if a cow's pregnant till day 40. In a healthy cow, there's still quite a lot. They go from about 70% pregnant down to about 45% pregnant. But in cows that had metritis, it was double. So their pregnancy losses from day 19 till day 40 were more than 70%. So that you wound up with, of the cows who had metritis as a fresh cow, only 19% of them were pregnant at 40 days after their first service. The mechanism is that's a big question, but the short version is there are effects that are actually best studied on the quality of the egg. So even of her oocyte, because of that long hangover and that long growth phase. And there's some other research that show long-term effects on the quality of the uterus, development of uterine glands to support the pregnancy, etc. So there's effects both on her ovaries and on her uterus that lead her to have these greater pregnancy losses.
Thank you so much. We have one last question coming in, I believe. So, how do we find, and this is again for you, Stephen, how do we find balance between monitoring clinical and subclinical diseases without disturbing that time budget of dairy cows, right? Sometimes we just have to let cows be cows, let them have their consistent environment. So, how often should we check our cows and not disturb their peace and quiet?
I don't know the answer to that officially yet. Obviously, the thing that's promising on the horizon is using technology, rumination activity, daily changes in milk. It can be other things in the future with cameras and so on. The promise there is that we'll be able to be way more efficient about leaving most of the cows alone most of the time. We're getting there. I don't know that we're quite there yet. So, if I was running a dairy tomorrow, which that's only my dream, but if I was running a dairy tomorrow, I would be checking fresh cows for metritis and ketosis at least twice a week, maybe three times per cow between 3 and 10 days in milk. Would be two key things that would cause me to go bother the cow briefly, carefully, quickly. But that's where I'm going to find things that are not obvious, that I'm not going to see just by looking at the cow, no matter how good a farmer I am. And then I would add what I mentioned earlier, that other, I think, really critical control point at around 5 weeks postpartum would be finding and treating those cows that have pus discharge. I think that's a excellent starting point to March 11, 2025's best answer, at least for me.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Last but not least, I know I asked the question to Bruno, but Anton, I also want to ask you, what any piece of final advice would you have to share with our participants or dairy farmers on the line today? The mic's all yours.
All right, thank you. Well, I would encourage all the farmers to have a plan, whatever it may look like on their farm, to consistently get cows bred. And it might be individual per farm, but there's still the largest reason why cows don't get pregnant is semen deficiency. That's still the largest reason. And the reason I think that is so important is because if your repro is not working, then we get long days in milk. Then our transition problem runs into problems, and our transition problems then again turn into more breeding problems. So I would really encourage people to have a plan in place, get cows bred, and also to work with their advisors. Like if they do see transition cow problems, don't accept them, don't give up. Keep working at it with your vet and your nutritionist until you have them to a low or manageable level, because it is super important for profitability. And don't give up on it. Never give up on it. Just keep bugging those people till you get it figured out.
Thank you so much, Anton, for those last words of wisdom. And thank you to all three of our panelists today. I do invite you to thank them in the chat or by using the React function. We'd also appreciate if you could take 2 minutes to fill out the satisfaction survey. You should be seeing my screen right now. So you can just take your phone, scan the QR code. It will help us improve our next webinars and make sure that we continue bringing you relevant and impactful learning opportunities. Je vais aussi le répéter en français.
I'll repeat this
Parce
in
que ça peut
French
pas être dit
because,
assez. Merci.
thank you. Thank you to our three panelists today. Thank you very much. I invite you to thank them in the chat or by using the reaction function. And you take 2 minutes, please. Take your phone, scan the QR code on the screen to help us to better improve our webinar and to offer you learning opportunities that are
Back to English.
good.
We'll continue to develop new content for you To help you stay informed, there's 3 ways in which you can stay connected with us. First, on the Lactanet website. So again, hope your phone isn't too far away. You can visit the temporary webpage of the project on Lactanet by scanning that code. You can also join our mailing list so that you get updates about new content directly to your inbox. And last but not least, you can follow us on social media. Thanks again for attending today's Canadian Dairy Hub webinar. This webinar was developed by Lactanet and was brought to you thanks to Dairy Farmers of Canada funding through the National Dairy Knowledge Transfer Project. Encore une fois, merci d'avoir participé au webinaire du pôle laitier canadien d'aujourd'hui.
Thank you for being with us today. This webinar was developed by Lactanet, and thanks to funding from the Dairy Producers of Canada within the Dairy Transfer Knowledge Project. So thank you very much.